Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
We're back for another series of Gourds and Pomegranates. I feel like that needs a really catchy tagline there, but I didn't have one prepared, so never mind. What we're going to do today is a little bit different. We're going to tackle a number of different topics, and we're going to try and do them in a really sort of quick-fire way.
We'll try.
We'll try. If you know us and you listened to us before, we can waffle, but that's okay. We're passionate about what we're talking about. And we have taken inspiration from some of the Facebook groups and communities and other online communities where church comms people tend to gather. And I mean, slight pet peeve alert. There's that thing when you join a group and ask a question, and probably instead of asking that question, you should have searched through the group because the question's been asked 20 times before. Yeah. So we want to try and sort of address some of the questions that we've seen coming up quite often, and they're not necessarily going to be the most obvious things, and hopefully the obvious things are things that we've covered in the 50 episodes up to this point of the podcast. But yeah, hopefully just be interesting and useful answers to questions, either things that you have thought about asking before or things that you've never thought about before, and just thinking about it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. So the first question is actually something that I am helping with a client anyway. So this is just very helpful for me to have a think about. I'm hearing some wisdom from you, Joe. What are effective designs or layouts for welcome cards or connect cards? Like where do I start if I'm thinking about those?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing to say is that like a welcome card will mean different things to different people. Man, I said we're going to be quick fire, and I started off with point number one. Essentially, I think the question is talking about things that you give to people who are new and a way to connect. So I put those into two main categories. There's info and there's connection. The info ones, it can be really helpful to have like something to give to people so they can find out more about the church. But if you have a full-on leaflet or something like that, it goes out of date really quickly if you try to include too much in it. So having separate flyers or postcards can be a really good way. They don't need to be particularly fancy, but you just give people the information that they need. Or if we're thinking more about connection and getting people kind of hooked into the other comms methods that we use as a church, then you can have a postcard for that where people fill out their details. That's fine. Digital is better. Not only does it reduce the admin because you don't need to go and input that data, and then there's obviously better for data security as well, that you're not going to lose the postcard or something, but it automatically captures consent as well. So yeah, either way, with digital or with physical, keep the forms to fill out as short as possible. Again, it means that it's a good thing for GDPR that you're not asking for info that you don't need, but it also just makes the form shorter and people are more likely to actually fill them out. Yeah. And then again, with all of this, any sort of connection thing, I think it's important to make it easy for people to access. So if it is digital, have a redirect. So ours is like ourchurch.co.uk/join, and that goes straight to the form to fill out, and it's easy to remember and to tell people that. Sometimes we even show it like on our phones and ask people to fill it out there, or you might have iPads or something, or use a QR code. I don't think that's an either or. I think it's a both and sort of thing. And then the last thing to say on it is point people to where they can find out more. Mm-hmm. So that little flyer can be useful to get a few things across, but if you try and get too much on there, it's going to be really crowded, and as I say, it'll probably go out of date quickly. So a really effective way is to point people to a new here page on your website, and that will have more info about the church, but also pathways that they can kind of click on and explore to find out more different things and other ways to connect. So yeah, that's that. So next question. How can churches handle last-minute changes, like a venue change, for events that you've already been publicising for a while?
Yeah, so in the first instance, put any information up, any changes, as soon as possible. Don't sort of hang around waiting for someone else to, I don't know, just check we're all okay kind of thing. As soon as something changes, put it up. Or as soon as As soon as it's confirmed changes, don't go flip flopping back and forth kind of thing.
Yeah, I've been there.
Put it out on all the platforms that you've been promoting on, because there's nothing worse than you've seen it on Instagram, so you go to it, like go to the event, and then something's changed and they say, well, we put it on Facebook, and you're like, well, I didn't see this on Facebook.
And I suppose you probably have notes from where you were publicising it anyway, that you know that you're putting it on Instagram or Facebook, so use those notes and go back to those places.
Yeah. Exactly. It can be helpful to have a sort of template and something that is also on the branding of whatever event it was. Otherwise, people could sort of like, I don't know, people not put two and two together. That is for that event that's going on. So sort of make sure it does align with what has been posted already. If it's a ticketed event, most of the time, depending on how on the systems and how you book it.
How you've collected your RSVPs, yeah. Yeah,
you should be able to message everyone. So on something like Eventbrite, I know we've you can send this sort of thank you for buying. Here's the, I don't know if it's a digital event or something, but then you can also do, here's a reminder, it's starting tomorrow. And you could do the same of going, really sorry, sudden change, we're in a different hall or something like that. So you can actually, you've got all the people that you need to know. But again, put it out on social just in case people don't see it or it goes into spam or something. Now, it is also likely that people won't see the posts, won't see the emails, or they see it and they just don't clock it, and they will still turn up at the wrong venue at the wrong time or something. It can be really helpful, and actually, well, it's be really advisable just to put up signage to say, sorry, change of whatever, and even if possible, if you've got the people, to have someone on the door being able to direct people to the right place, or just sort of, it better to have someone there and then no one turn up than have a guest turn up and actually get really angry and annoyed that they feel that they have not been kind of like communicated with. So just do as much as you can.
Yeah, definitely. So next up, thinking a little bit about GDPR, and specifically with communities like WhatsApp. So the immediate asterisk here, whenever GDPR comes up, I say it, this isn't legal advice. And your church should have a data protection officer, and they will need to think this through properly. However, as an attempt at a quick answer, so thinking with WhatsApp groups, it's better if these are opt-in. So you have a link that people can click and choose to join rather than manually adding people. If they specifically request that you add them, then obviously you can do that. But that means that permission for sending to them isn't an issue there. Always sensible to have admins for WhatsApp groups who can handle admitting people. It might be that even once you've clicked on the link, you want to have a second approval and that admin can check, especially for like closed things, especially for like leadership groups and an organization. So that's really sensible. I think having an awareness that just because you've got someone's contact details in a WhatsApp chat doesn't mean that you have permission to use that for other means. So that doesn't mean you can start sending them out text messages for event invites or putting it onto your system or anything like that, unless you have specific permission to do that. And then just a really key thing is about just being careful with people's data. And so if you are using WhatsApp on behalf of the church, it's good practice anyway, but make sure that those devices are secure. Make sure they're password protected, maybe even have like Face ID or fingerprint for WhatsApp itself. Just being really careful. And the last thing is, if you are, again, processing that data on behalf of the church, make sure it's covered off in your privacy policy as well.
Yeah. So then on to the next question. What are some free software tools? Are there any free software tools for displaying lyrics during worship? I have to say, in the past, I've just used PowerPoint, but I'm sure there are some actual.
Yeah, there's a place for PowerPoint, which, for the sake of argument, isn't free. Google Slides.
That's true.
And we've been doing some like simpler services recently, like in the cafe area, and it's just been easier to throw them in a PowerPoint, have all the songs in one thing, and that's fine. But even like taking 10 or 15 minutes to do that, there are quicker ways. So projection software is great. There are loads of options out there. There are several that are free. There are some which are subscription based, or there are some which are sort of one-off but more expensive. My go-to is OpenLP. It's open source. It's more user-friendly than it used to be, as open source software can be a little bit less intuitive. So that's my go-to choice. Works on Mac and Windows. Worship Tools is another good one. They have free and paid options, and that is maybe a little bit less feature-rich, but probably easier to use. So both worth a look. We specifically talked about the benefits of using like worship projection software rather than something like PowerPoint in episode 28. So go back and listen to that one. Thinking then about wins. Okay, so how do churches celebrate wins such as baptisms, completed sermon series, that sort of thing, like celebrations?
Yay! have posters like that. No, I mean, well, actually, no, do celebrate them, because I think it's such a wonderful thing, especially something like a baptism. I don't think they're happening as much as we'd like them to necessarily, or at least in my sphere at the minute. And I think it's such a shame, because then you see one or two that have happened, but it's like, oh yeah, we had a baptism on Sunday. And you're like, why are we not shouting about this? This is amazing, wonderful news. So in the first instance, I would say, try to take as many pictures or videos as possible, but making sure that you, prior to this, have asked for permission.
And not necessarily because there's like an additional legal need to or anything, but it's quite a personal thing. So yeah, you'd want to be sure that they're okay with it being shared. Yeah,
definitely. But, you know, even if it's not necessarily the actual submersion or something, but just sharing that kind of thing, but having, you know, being conscious as you're coming into the service or whatever occasion it might be, of going, actually, we're going to take some pictures. I'm going to be looking out for an opportunity to kind of capture. And then to fairly promptly share on social media, you know, put it up on your website, and actually even within WhatsApp groups or newsletters, be able to share it out in there, because it is wonderful encouragement to people. I think also of beforehand setting a kind of formula of a way where you can share things. So if it's baptisms, are there kind of like 3 sample questions or something that you could ask everyone who is getting baptized? Or if it's a sermon series, of like, what are you know, what were the 3 main takeaways? What did you really enjoy? What did you learn new? And actually, so you've got the questions ready, but it's just about then going and capturing it at the event or after the event, so that then you can just compile them together. So you're avoiding
sort of to just think going, on the fly.
Yeah. But rather than you're just going, oh, we finished a sermon series, well done. We finished a sermon series, well done. We had a baptism, well done. And you're just sort of putting some stock image up kind of thing. But so the formula is the same, so people recognize it, but actually the what is being told is slightly different. We don't want to say copy what other churches are doing, but on these sorts of occasions, it can be helpful to see what sort of creative ways and sort of styles or how people are sharing, other churches are sharing the content to kind of similar messages, and sort of being inspired by that. But just try to think a little bit differently and sort of like actually acknowledge those sort of, those wins or those milestones within the church family.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, you know, we're talking about the Facebook communities where these questions are asked, and inspiration is a lot of that, and seeing what other people are doing. So yeah, I think with this, a little bit of planning goes a long way.
So staying on the sort of social media theme, Facebook ads can be a bit of a murky water. People aren't really sure if we should be going into it or not. What are the best practices for targeting audiences, like especially when it comes to targeting something that seems sort of too specific or challenging?
Yeah. I think part of the reason that Facebook ads are murky is because so often we just kind of do it as it seems like a good idea without properly thinking about it. And that's why the first thing we're targeting, it has to be first, and it's absolutely essential, and that's location. Because if you are not targeting by location, then unless you are advertising a digital event, which is, entirely possible, if you're advertising a physical event and you're targeting people who are outside of your immediate area, you're immediately wasting money. So that's definitely the first thing to do. And then you need to think about what you're promoting. So if it's an event, think about the audience, the type of people that you want to be at the event. Is it aimed at anyone specific, like a family event or an event for older people? Because then after location, age is probably the next most important thing that you're going to consider and target by. I think a helpful tip when it comes to ad targeting, whether it's Facebook or on other platforms, Google, LinkedIn, whatever, don't get distracted by the numbers that they're showing to you on those platforms. So when you put in each level of targeting, that number will shrink, but it will show you if you do this or add this keyword, then you can add this many 1,000 people within the reach. And obviously that doesn't necessarily mean that the 1,000 people are going to see it, but they're the potential audience. Don't get distracted by that, because you're not looking to reach the highest number possible. You are looking for a specific audience. Again, we could spend ages talking about targeting here, and if you are serious about it and willing to put some budget into it, then it's something where it can really pay off. But I'd say that it's worth talking to a professional on it. But the final thing I say is make sure that the design of your ad matches the audience that you're targeting. So if you're targeting young professionals, don't have a really fluffy kids design, because even if they're likely to see it, which they're probably less likely because Facebook won't promote it quite as much, it's not going to speak to them. And so it's not just about getting the ad in front of people, but then it's about getting them to actually take an action. And if they click on it, where are they going then? Make sure they've got a landing page with the info and they can take the action that you want them to take from it.
Yeah, definitely.
So staying on advertising, but I think going wider to sort of social media publicity as well. How can churches make use of paid ads for fundraising campaigns?
Yeah, it's always a tricky one, I think, for something where you're asking for money, because we always seem to be there's always that sort of joke that the church is always asking for money for the roof. But I think when done well, it can be very impactful, and actually it's necessary for us to be able to maintain activity that we're doing, but also to raise money for mission projects or partners. But then the first thing to think about is know who you're asking to give. And I think the majority of the time with churches, it will be a kind of an internal appeal. So you're asking to your church congregation, you're asking to the people that you are already connected to.
And that doesn't rule out paying for it. Like you can pay to have it promoted and boosted to your existing audience. But I think, it's just worth knowing that audience and knowing what you're doing with it.
Yeah. But it's also actually, if it is particularly within that, it's sort of making sure that actually it's communicated offline as well as online. And I think it's making sure that it's not that people are going, oh, I've seen this ad and you've never mentioned this in church, but making sure that if it's a campaign, that actually you're thinking about all of the kind of the touch points that those people might be seeing.
Yeah, definitely.
If it's an external appeal, ask yourself, why would people care? Why, if you're trying to do something within your church building, why would the people in your community care? Actually, is there a benefit to them having an improved, if you're trying to do a building project, actually this means that we can offer more activities and more facilities for the community. Actually, that is something that people then do buy into. And it's not about being cynically selling something, but no. Building that story, thinking about the who, the why and the how, actually, why should they be giving? What are they giving towards? How does that impact them? And it's not just then about, oh, we've had the money and that's it, but actually taking them along that story as to like, cool, we fundraise, here is us doing this thing and here is it afterwards, and making sure that again, the campaign is not just about give us the money and then we're never talking to you, but it's a journey and that whole story throughout the entire process. And then I think also, if thinking specifically about online campaigns, it's making it easy to give. Sending people to a landing page with clear instructions and a giving link. I mean, I say this personally, it annoys me when people, churches, projects, charities ask for money and you're like, yeah, cool. And then there's no instructions, or it just says, here are the bank details. And I'm like, there are so many useful, easy to use Christian giving platforms.
Yeah, just make it easy.
Just make it easy. Like, it's really not that difficult to, I don't know, set up a stewardship account. And because I then I'll give, whereas you've made it difficult for me to give. I can't be bothered now, which is, and partly because I was not massively incentivized and motivated to want to give because there was no story. So again, of like, make it as easy as possible for people to give. Then thinking on actually making things as easy as possible for people, communicating within the church family is really important. Is it beneficial for churches to use platforms like Slack or Discord for staff collaboration and communications with volunteers?
Yeah, so I guess there's communication within the church family, and even more specifically within the teams that are doing things, running things within a church. So is it beneficial? Yes, if people are actually using it. If people aren't going to download and install something new and separate like Slack, which maybe is an easier sell if you've got people who are already using it. If they're not, then stick to what people are using. Stick to a WhatsApp group or something like that. Have it in a separate thread if you need it to. Even if you've already got a group with those same people, at least then the conversation is threaded and kept in the right place and easier to track than like loads of different email threads. I think with this, it's about you, your team. It will depend on the size of the team, the nature of who's on it. It's about finding the right tools for you. So yes, there are church-specific tools. I think that was one of the questions I saw around this. A lot of the time, the non-church specific tools are better, which it's not always the case, but often so. Something like Trello, Notion, Asana, they're going to have much bigger teams, much bigger budgets. They're much more established. Their software is better for something like project management. So we tend to use Trello for our staff project management, and then WhatsApp for actually communicating as well. With that said, there will be some things within the church where it is beneficial to have a church-specific tool where you're doing things which are more unique to churches. So if you're talking about planning your services, something like Planning Center, or that's something that Church Suite now has built into it as well. Church Suite, Ecclesia, Tithely and Breeze are sort of platforms that include giving, but also your database management or CRM where you're managing the details of people within your church and communicating with them directly as well. So our church uses Church Suite for that. Or as we've already mentioned, projection software and having that specific thing which is more helpful for your needs than something generic like PowerPoint. Yeah. Just be aware of tool overload. So we can say, oh, that's a new tool that'll solve that problem. Oh, there's one there, and we're using 10 tools, but we're not really properly using any of them. Yeah. So slim it down, use the ones that are actually helping you and sort of keep it simple, because a tool isn't useful if people aren't actually using it. And then in terms of administration, it's helpful to keep some sort of oversight there for your admin. So even if your administrator isn't using a platform, it can be helpful for them to have an account, just so there's that continuity and you don't lose access to something. So yeah, that can be useful as well. Also, with all of these, remember data security, especially when you're talking about like database stuff with all the people's details. Please use a strong password, use two-factor authentication. We've talked about that before. Again, it goes back to your privacy policy as well.
So kind of then touching on to management and systems, what platforms are effective for building and managing church websites?
So it'll be a bit controversial here. As a web designer, all the web platforms these days are kind of much of a muchness. Yes, there's some out there that are a bit rubbish, but a lot of them are kind of leveling out, and the features that you really need, are available on all of them. So yes, some are easier to use. Some might have slightly more advanced features. You might have more control over things, but the place where I most often see churches tripping up isn't the platform. It's knowing the goals of the church website and then seeking to meet them. So it doesn't matter what platform you're on. It doesn't matter if you've got a really nice looking design. if the site doesn't make it easy, for example, for newcomers to find ways into the church. We talked about a new here page, or to find out basic details like when and where you meet, to find out who you are, give an insight to what you believe, that sort of thing. So yeah, focus on that first. With that said, if you are going down that sort of DIY route with your website and you need to choose a platform, make sure it's something which is intuitive and makes sense to you as the person who is going to be using it. If it's another volunteer and you're helping them to choose, then make sure it makes sense to them and choose it based on that, first and foremost, that ease of use. Because if you find it frustrating to use, you are less likely to sort of log in and actually keep it up to date. And then the site becomes less useful to the people who need to use it. And it's a bit of a spiral. So yeah. And then finally, whatever platform you use, as long as it's not some like crazy niche non-used one, there will be loads of tutorials out there for it. Again, there are church specific web platforms out there. Some of the tools we mentioned have that built in as well. This will always come across as biased as I'm a web designer. They can be easier to use, but very limited. So if you are absolute basic and don't know where to start, then look at them. But I think it's very easy to go beyond them quickly.
Yeah.
This is a bit of an interesting question, because it talks about like comms directors, and that's something which a lot of churches in the UK are nowhere near having, like a paid member of staff. But thinking then of like someone who's responsible for church communications, let's put it that way. Yeah. What responsibilities should a church communications role encompass? Should that include website management, for example?
So I think the first thing to think about is what's the priority. So is it about internal comms of just communicating out and being responsible for communicating within the church family, or is it about trying to reach new people? Because actually, if it's about reaching new people, we're probably managing a WhatsApp group isn't so much of a priority, but website is and social media is, but it will be done in a very different way.
Yeah,
It is to think in the first instance of, well, what actually do we want this person to, who do we want them to be communicating with, and what do we want them to be saying?
What's the vision for the role? Yeah,
exactly. Because the thing is, you say communications, and as we say, that covers a number of different things. That does cover social media, website, print, from literature to banners and different things, from video to written stuff. So yeah. I think a skill in being in a variety of areas and being able to do everything, but not expecting the sort of unicorn employee or unicorn volunteer to be amazing at everything. They should be able to sort of get to grips with most stuff, from the general content creation, thinking about development, but even platform management, that can be really important. But of not expecting them to be the absolute expert, because also if this is just a volunteer role,
there's a limit to their time and what they can put into it.
And definitely, and I think to an extent as well, it can be really helpful to have experience and an understanding of secular context, because I think that's a really helpful thing to be able to transition and pull into. So if we're thinking about, stuff like Slack or Notion or Trello, most churches probably wouldn't use them, but actually being able to bring them from the secular context can be really helpful of going, actually, we can make this easier. And again, of other things, social media scheduling tools, or even things like CapCut and stuff that you wouldn't assume you wouldn't necessarily know it within the church, but actually it can really help with creating content. I think also you want someone, and it works both if it's a volunteer or a paid member of staff, someone who can work on their own, who can be creative and think sort of without needing to be sort of micromanaged. But I think it's also really important that they can work in teams, of being able to encourage volunteers, or, in the amazing dream world that they then have other employed staff under them, of actually being able to engage and support them, of it being a team thing, because I think that is really important for a church context, of that it's not just, again, one person and then suddenly they aren't able to continue on anymore, and suddenly there's no one posting and no one knows how to manage the email system and stuff. So I think it is really important to be able to to work on their own, but also gather people in, onboard them with the vision. Because if that one person is responsible for that vision of this is what we're going to be creating and this is how we're going to connect with people, actually suddenly everyone else can kind of like get on board and think, actually, I can see how this can work because you've helped to drive that vision.
Yeah. And I think, as is often the case in church roles, skills are helpful and important, but what's more important is character and being able to translate that vision of the church leaders into what does that actually look like in strategy as well. And that's something that I think we can see across the board with comms and other ministries as well.
So sticking on the social media theme, are there any workarounds or third-party apps for posting live video on social media?
I don't know about workarounds, but yeah, in terms of like using software to stream, the first thing is to think about what platforms you're streaming on, and to know why you're streaming. And we talked about that in a live streaming episode before, which we'll link in the notes. If you are only streaming to one platform, then often it is easier to just go direct. So if you're streaming to YouTube, just use YouTube Studio in your browser. But with that said, there are lots of options these days for sort of customizing your stream and streaming to multiple platforms at once, even managing your chat from across the different platforms in one thing. So this is something that you can do with Riverside. That's what we're using right now for our sort of virtual podcast studio. There are plenty of other browser-based options as well. Or if you want to go more manual, then OBS is software that can give you that sort of full control, assuming that your machine is powerful enough to actually run it effectively. And then all of these things, all these pieces of software will give you options for like playing in media. So if that's like a pre-service video or something like that, you can put in captions or graphics like people's names and lower thirds and all that sort of thing. It's worth noting that there are some hardware solutions that can do this. So like the Blackmagic Atom, if you get the one which has got an Ethernet port on it, then that can stream direct to where you tell it to. So just press the live button on your device and it goes to YouTube automatically, which is great. But you can still use that with the browser-based tools as well. Yeah. Thinking about church announcements then. So how do churches handle sort of gathering the info for announcements and actually getting the info out there?
Well, whoever is responsible, and there really does need to be someone responsible. You can't just sort of leave it to chance for someone to randomly gather it. Whoever is responsible will have their own system. And I really don't think it's a definite, there is only this way that it should be done, because again, everyone is different and will work in different ways and have experience in different systems. But a good place to start is looking at the calendar for the next few months, or if you're super organized, the whole year perhaps. But thinking ahead, highlighting events that do need promoting and working backwards as to when they need to be promoted, when they need to be announced, and even working in within then comms people or other people involved as to when stuff needs to get printed or designed so that it can go up on websites and emails and things. If it's something bigger like a church weekend away, or certain events where they require payment and blocking out weekends in the diaries, you really need to make sure that you're giving people as much notice as possible, so that you don't have lower numbers because people just didn't have the notice to be able to think about it.
Yeah.
And then it's also the case for bigger events where you want to have a larger reach with your community, going beyond just your church family. So, to give a sort of exaggerated example, you probably want to promote your Christmas events where you want to have a filled out church, significantly more in advance, give a significantly longer run up time than just a church lunch where it's those who are coming to the service will share a meal together. Also sort of try to keep a note of what needs promoting when and, across which platforms. So, you might want to do, for some events, save the date so that the people know the kind of key information, and then do further events about, in newsletters about what's happening, and, here are some key details. And then, perhaps a little later on of then, here are full booking details and stuff. But better to at least again get it in someone's diary, and then they can organise booking it later on.
Yeah. Awareness first and then asking for action later.
Yeah, definitely. And also if there are things that, Q&As or frequently asked questions and stuff that might be needed to be answered, do that later down the line, because it's a great way of building that sort of momentum and sustained interest in the event.
Yeah.
And making sure also that everything is communicated with those who need to know. So, for example, if, someone else is leading a service, make sure they know key details and information to announce. And it can be really helpful as well to give a slide so that they know what they're saying, but also that people remember when it's being said.
Yeah. So I think this would probably be our last question for this episode. And it's one which I probably wouldn't have thought much about until about 3 years ago for reasons which become obvious. So how can we ensure the church is a welcoming place to parents with young children, for example, with like a nursing room? I think something that I've noticed is you want to make it clear that young children and babies are not only welcome, but they're completely not a bother. So it's okay if a child makes a bit of noise in the service. Announcing that goes a long way to helping parents relax, like literally saying, we understand that babies make noise and that's okay, we're not going to be offended, so it helps parents to relax.
In the aisles.
Yeah, but also it sends a message to the rest of the congregation as well that we're not so super holy that we're going to be judging people or even like shushing people if there's a bit of disruption. And we can extend that to more than kids as well. That there are people who are going to be disruptive to a service and it's not their fault and it's okay. We're understanding with that and we have enough grace to apply that to people. For our welcoming team, it's really helpful if they're like proactive. So the people on the door tell parents about creche, especially if they're not someone that and it's their first time. Don't assume that they'll ask. If you have the luxury of like a side room where parents can hang out with babies or nurse, then let people know, point it out to them, maybe walk them to it and show them. And as we thought about back in our Through the Eyes of a Newcomer episode, which is still one of my favourites to this day, don't forget about like signposting people and having posters and signs up throughout the building. And then it's a small thing which makes a big difference, but with babies, wherever your baby change area is, have some essentials on hand, like nappies, wipes, nappy bags, that sort of thing. It's a really small cost, but it makes a big difference, especially if you've forgotten those.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this episode, and our quickfire episode has still been 40 minutes long, but that's okay. There are things that we've covered today that are completely new, even on our 51st episode. So hopefully the answers have been helpful. Of course, if you have any questions or things you'd like us to cover, then shoot them over to us at hello@gppodcast.uk. And perhaps if you're even brave enough, then you might want to volunteer to be a case study for a future episode where we can see what you're doing brilliantly with your comms, but maybe suggest some improvements as well.
Definitely. And obviously a huge shout out to the communities and Facebook groups where these questions were asked and answered. In our show notes, we'll link to our resources page, which we started with our episode covering all our favourite church comms resources. But we will keep it updated with new things and when we come across them. So do learn from them and contribute back to the community. Thank you for listening, and we're looking forward to this new season.
Gourds and Pomegranates is brought to you by Joe Gallant and Hannah Fleming Hill. You can find episode transcripts and contact the show via gppodcast.uk.